you know, let it be known right now again. You
All right,
ready?
good. My mic is clear though, right?
Yep. Mic check. Ready?
All right, let's
What's
go.
going on, everybody? It's Ron Brown, LMT, the People's Fitness Professional, alongside my co-host,
Mikey Fever.
and this is a New Yorker's perspective. Again, with the God Suñez Allah.
Back in the building, about to drop that.
Yo, and today we're gonna talk about the 5% Nation. I'm gonna dub it as the 5% Nation Latin edition. And I wanted to say this, right? As we know, Latin is a misnomer due to the history of Latin, Rome, etc., right?
Mhm.
However, um, we're using it for a lack of better term. We're using it for the lack of better term, and I thought that would be this is an important episode because of what I'm seeing online, and I just couldn't understand it when I saw certain things online when Suñez was on last time. I'm like, yo, in New York City, we grew up in New York City, bro. My first best friend was Puerto Rican. He passed on, but my first best friend, he was Puerto Rican. We all lived together in the city. There is no issues, so to speak. I mean, we all have our things going on, even in our own tribes, if you will. However, we all are one community. We're together. This is New York City or Nawa. It's a quote unquote melting pot. We all grew up together. Uh, we probably have relationships and in each other's families, going into each other's homes, borrowing sugar and all types of stuff, right?
Exactly.
So in other states, I don't know how it goes. However, in New York, we're all one family, and really in the culture in the 5% Nation, we're all one family. So to see there is some issue with you know Puerto Rican or whatever the case may be online, it just didn't make any sense for me. So I just thought that it'll be a great opportunity to maybe educate people on,
Mm-hmm.
the 5%ers who are so-called Latin in the nation who contributed. And that's all I
Can I,
got to
can I,
say.
can I add something to that?
Yes, sir.
Whomever has an issue with brothers from Latin countries being Hispanic whatsoever are probably people that live under a rock, probably not exposed to different cultures, who are passive, stuck in ignorance, and subscribe to colonialism, the way of thinking of the colonists. Because again, peace to the gods, peace to the earth, right? But I know in their lessons they say there are 17 million in original man, with 2 million Indians, making a total of 19 million of the original, people in the northern North America. So that right there, even a baby could pick that up and say, you know what, we are one
Mm-hmm.
family.
Right.
Let's not even get to the whole DNA process. We're just one family. Let's just leave it like that. So,
But
people,
even if we went DNA,
yeah,
my DNA has Taino all in it.
and that's respected. You get what I'm saying? And even
Crazy.
like you said with the DNA thing, right?
Hmm.
I don't, I don't see it as that. I look at it as there's only one human. There's only one race is the human race, right? Unless it's something else that we don't know about. But again, brothers that have an issue with brothers being whether they're Puerto Rican, um, Dominican, whatever it is, they have an issue with that are bugged out. And,
Hmm.
we gotta
I
stop that.
think it also comes from like brothers and who's been in prison and all that, in
Exactly.
institution, prison institution, and all that. They had issues and things like that. I think some of that comes from that as well because there were wars going on, and now why, especially in the prisons, and that's why the Bloods were created out of that issue, right? So I'm not going to shy away from that. That's a fact that happened,
Yeah,
but
that
but
happened, but we can't. Human beings, we can't generalize everyone based on one experience.
Right.
We gotta grow. We gotta think outside of the box. And what happened in prison, unfortunately, it happens, right?
Yeah.
It's not the best place to be. But in retrospect, when you look back at it, why were we? We're both in the same position. Why are
Right.
we fighting? Why we feel we're divided? Because why we know we're rumbling this and that. The others are laughing at you. Now, look, they doing it themselves. The self
Right.
cleaning oven.
Right.
Let's just leave it at that.
Right. So now with all that said,
Mhm.
let's talk Suñez Allah. Suñez Allah is definitely one who has contributed to the nation for, I would say, over 20 years. In the law school there every Thursday. Uh I mean, I'm not gonna lie, brother. I don't know how you do it because you're there every Thursday. Like
Right.
that alone right there is just amazing. So
Yeah, yeah,
let's talk a little bit about your history, God.
yeah. I'll talk about my history and in a different way, I guess this time, and try to juxtapose that with the Puerto Rican experience, so people can understand kind of like the ideas and how we, the nation of gods and earth, see it. Those of us with knowledge of self, and how that is a different perspective, and it makes sense that it would collide with a lot of people. You know what I mean? Especially when the society is built on capitalizing on differences that are perceived, perceived differences, and aggravating real conflicts. You know what I'm saying? Real conflicts. And using that against us. But what's interesting is that like when you intro God, you were saying about growing up in around Puerto Ricans with Puerto Ricans. I had a very different experience. I probably grew up in one of the few neighborhoods in Brooklyn that was really all Puerto Rican at one time,
Mm,
almost all Puerto Rican. So when I grew up in Sunset Park, like we were bordered by Park Slope, and not we are bordered by Park Slope and Bay Ridge. So you're seeing a lot of white folk when you get out of there, and then there are pockets of Park Slope that have Puerto Ricans and they have and blacks as well, Black Americans. But for the most part, when you grow up in a neighborhood, though, you're in that small radius that you live in, so you don't always go out to the other neighborhoods. So I grew up in a predominantly all Puerto Rican neighborhood, so much so that other Latinos that were in the neighborhood, I just as a child assumed that they were Puerto Rican. And it was those type of things where when there were other Latinos, like other, let's say a Mexican or Peruvian or something like that, we would make fun of them like they're not really the real like we are. You know what I'm saying? Like it was that heavily dominated, right?
mhm.
So I'm coming from one of the last neighborhoods that would understand the concept of all original people being one. You know what I'm saying? Because of that. But another distinct thing about Sunset Park is that we got into hip hop heavy, just like all the other neighborhoods, right? But I think, and I talked about this to a lot of brothers in my neighborhood, even back then and went out in the 90s, to kind of get respect in hip hop. And this juxtaposes with my history as well. To try to get respect in hip hop or to even do it on a larger scale, you had to leave the neighborhood. You know what I mean? Our neighborhood wasn't famous for there's no famous individuals that were rapping from that neighborhood, like, the Sty or Brownsville, you know what I mean? So you had to leave to do something. So that was kind of my experience as a journalist, though. I'm leaving to represent the neighborhood, but I'm not really, nobody is really there that I could bring with me or notice at the time. I tried, and eventually there were, but as time goes on, it's over 20 years. But it's when I'm in college, though, that I start really writing about music, that I start trying to write better about the music and actually listen to the lyrics. At the time, I was noticing that the majority, not everyone, but the majority of music, of journalism written about music, especially hip hop music, wasn't really talking about the actual music. At their best, they were giving good stories about the people. Like let's put it to like big famous people, a good story about Tupac's life. But then when you go into the article, it doesn't really break down what he did on the album. There's no quotes of lyrics. There's no questions about what did you mean in this lyric? What did you mean in that lyric? They're asking him about his life story, the things, and it works with a Tupac, right? Because his story is so much more interesting than pretty much everybody's music, right? Like his story is crazy. But for the most part, that ruins, for me, it ruins music journalism. So I wanted to know more about it. So I would study the lyrics, and I would notice people saying to God, saying this, saying that. And I would notice things, and I would notice that it was just Black Americans saying that. And there were no, there were no Puerto Ricans that were saying that. So I kind of like it's kind of just stayed in the back of my head. But when I started to write about it, and I started to really listen, my own ego kicked in. And I felt like if they said that God, I don't see the difference between me saying that. And if they're saying that they're God because they're Black, I know I have some Black blood and indigenous blood, like a very bad Puerto Rican history. So it's funny that when you're in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, you're generally not taught Puerto Rican history. I learned that when I went to college. You know what I mean? And it was only when it's funny that at the same time I was in college learning from the professor that would be my mentor, who was the first Puerto Rican I ever met that had a degree. And he was teaching with a PhD and 3 master's degrees. So I was like, wow, I never seen anyone like this. But at the same time, there was a bookstore that opened up very briefly. It didn't last long. It made sense it didn't last long. People don't like to read. But it was by Seri Colon. And it was the first time I went to a bookstore, right? And somebody was talking about Pedro Albizu Campos, who's like the famous Puerto Rican revolutionary. Right. Never heard of his name before. And the guy was saying that he was like fiery like Malcolm X. And I was like Malcolm X. And fought against the US. And they were talking about Lolita Lebron, who shot up the Capitol. And I was like, wow, we did that? We weren't just passive and docile and meek. And then he was talking about how Pedro Albizu Campos was radiated, and they tested radiation on him, and he was almost driven to tears. And I didn't know that we had that much pain. I didn't know that on other levels we related to our Black brothers on so many deeper levels. And it gave me a radicalism, a consciousness that, there's something that connects us that's not just the oppression, but also the blood. There's a reason they go after us in the first place. So most people think like we're just being oppressed because we're the lowest and we're low like you. I'm thinking we're being oppressed because there's something special we have that they are taking from us and subduing us from using it, So my perspective is different. It leads me to writing like this. I'm writing in articles in the college paper that I'm the God, I'm this and that, and I'm writing creative pieces like that. Magazines notice my work, and that's how I get into Vibe. But the first God I ever met, it might have been more, but I didn't know that there was God. You know what I mean? The first God that I overtly meet is Day Sun, the God Day Sun, and he's a writer in hip hop. He's a great writer, like doing it like me, and that's how I got brought to the school. So it was through hip hop. What I was saying got noticed, and then the God found me, and he was like, "Yo, there's a school that teaches this," and I was like, "Yo, this is crazy." And what's interesting is that how this differences between Puerto Ricans and Black Americans and all people, like we don't know our connections. We don't even feel akin to, let's say, a Puerto Rican and a Mexican, like even the indigenous, we don't even notice it. And I'll bring that home is that Day Sun, and Day Sun God.
Yeah.
Very eccentric, very dynamic, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he was telling me for a whole year. It took a year from me knowing him to the next year, him taking me. And he would keep telling me, like, if you're not writing exact, they're gonna bomb you. But he didn't really explain what bombing means. So it sounded horrible to me. Like they would kill me. Like I didn't know what that meant. So I was reading all these books. And that's why I went to the school. I had already knowledge the supreme math, alphabet, and 1 to 10 before I even went to the school. Because I was worried that I would get bombed and stuff. And I had read a couple of Elijah books. I read Destruction of Black Civilization. I read Afrocentricity. I was reading everything that was in the library I could find that made sense that I could get into. And I didn't know that I didn't need to know anything. I could be ignorant. You know what I'm saying? And but the disconnect made me worrisome that I wouldn't be accepted. And I think that's something to never forget about the divisions that our people have. Like we don't know that there's brotherhood, that there's camaraderie. And we, even when we feel it in ourselves, like I was back then, I didn't expect it. So even if I feel it, I didn't expect the same to be reciprocated. But when I went there, what was crazy was that, and I say this all the time, when I went, May 1st, 1999 was the first day I went to the school, and it was hot as hell. It was beautiful. It was like, yo, it was, if you made this day, you couldn't make it any better. Beautiful women everywhere, all over Mecca, everything. And I'm just like, we get to the school, and I never seen, I'll never forget this. This is the first time I ever seen in my life all these black men, women, children, and they're all doing something, and it's not about making music, because it's the only time I've seen camaraderie between our people, like among people in any cipher. We have them are interviewing artists that are just Black American, whether they're mixed with different original peoples in the group or just Puerto Ricans by themselves. I've never seen camaraderie of that nature, that positive, and it wasn't about music, you know. And the elders were so peace to me. You know, I wasn't around areas where like elders were respected or had something to show and prove that this respect was merited. You know, like most of the old people were crazy, and we're like, nah, you know, what are you saying, fool? Like, they're just, you know, drunkards or something else, or they're just not really caring about the youth and just doing their own thing. They were active with us, you know what I mean? Engaged with us and understanding us. And, you know, like the first day I was there, it was CLR. You remember CLR God? Yeah. And he told me to come Tuesday and to Knowledge Me's class. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be there. And that set it off into motion, you know? So from the beginning, no one looked at me like I wasn't the original man. In fact, the shocks only came to me, not to them. So I would be coming to the school, I would say peace, and they were like, peace, black man. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. For another person, if they go to another black brother, a black American, they say peace, black man. I'm telling you, we're all original people, God, we're all God, but it means something different to me, because I'm coming from a place where we was literally told that you have black, but you're not black. You see that odd misnomer that doesn't make any sense, but you think it makes sense. Mm-hmm. So when you see like, no, you have black, that means you are. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's crazy. So I was always embraced. And it was only as I went along, you know, the longer you're in an area, you find people that aren't really there sincerely in any cipher you're in. And so as we go along in the nation and I start to do more, I realized that some people, and we can say flat out here, misinterpret the degrees, like what you just mentioned. You know what I'm saying? And they'll say things like, well, the black seed, right? We have the black, brown, and the yellow seed, right? The black seed is the most dominant. So you kind of, and they say it in such a way like you have to like bow down, you know what I'm saying? And or other situations where I was in a situation with a guy that we used to kick it all the time. And he was my peer, like around the same age. He had knowledge longer than me, but because I got it late for a lot of the gods at that time. I was 23 when I got it. So that's like old man, like, you know, I truly feel that they embraced me because I was professional. I had a suit on, you know, God, in the beginning, I used to always have a suit on when I used to teach because I was coming from work. And I also, you know, I didn't have to be taught to not eat pork. I was vegan for years already. You know, I was vegan since 96. I get there at 99. So it's not even like, we don't even do pork. Like, so they didn't have to teach me to be civilized. So I was embraced on that level. But the God that I'm still peace with to this day, he goes, well, you know, the black seed, you know, the brown and yellow is not really like the black seed. You know what I mean? It's not really the same, you know? And I'm like, how are you saying all this? You know what I'm saying? How, you know, like the degree, the understanding cipher degree says that the original man is composed of the black and the brown germ.
Right.
So everything is already in him, though. What you see isn't everything that is. You know, he's composed of so much more. Right. That's what it means when the whole universe is within him. So, you know, it's there that I realized that some people just misinterpreted the degrees. They and like anything, a lot of people get knowledge of self because they're angry at white folk. And it allows them to have like something that they could feel more greater than them. It's not about our people sometimes. It's not about like we got to find the right knowledge so we can help our people. No, it's about like, I hate white people. And sometimes, you know, God, like we all have that hatred. Like we have anger. We went through things, you know.
Right.
I've never done crime like that. You know, the only crimes I've ever done was steal music. You know what I mean? That's it. But I've had cops put guns in my face while I was wearing a suit. So we all had the hatred of the cops and, you know, the system. When we start reading our history, we get fired up. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
as we
sir.
should.
Yes, sir.
But that's not the precedent. That's not when we learn about the Father, when he said, every elder, every firstborn that I ever met said, we're neither pro-black nor anti-white.
Exactly.
Right? We're anti-devilishment and pro-righteousness. You know, so it meant something that we are black, brown, yellow, but it means more that we're right and exact, you know?
Right.
And so throughout the years, I gotta tell you something. It's only people that are jealous or seek their own personal gain that have made, let's say, me being a Puerto Rican, an issue in the nation. You know what I mean? It's never been anyone that really lives this out, like have a real gripe. Like I truly have this knowledge for years and years, and I see that you're not the God. That's never been the case. You know, it's been the case with people that don't read well, and when you see it on the internet, it's because it's people that know about us and expect us to have the banner that they won't hold. Saying that man is God is the highest thing that he could be. Nothing else, no other superhero, you know, nothing else is bigger than saying that man is God. And a lot of the people on the internet, they feel exuberance by our existence, but they can't take that mantle. But they have their own conceptions about what black is and what it ought to be. Their own history about, let's say they had bad experiences with a Puerto Rican. Maybe a lot of times, guys, especially on the internet, is because they dated a Puerto Rican woman or got dissed by a Puerto Rican woman. You know what I mean? And here come
they're projecting. They're projecting.
Yeah, they're projecting. And here I come along. Maybe I'm as light as the sister you was talking to, and now you're gonna take it on me like I'm a brother. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Oh man.
You know, but
Cry baby.
I learned a long time ago, like this knowledge, right? If you take like this devil's civilization, we're defeating the devil's civilization, not the devil. It's not the devil that is single-handedly walking down and doing the harm directly. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's his system. It's a system that he's made, and most of us don't grow up and have an experience and say, you know, an actual white man actually did this to me at the job. Like, you'd be surprised how few people have that experience. They might talk about it, but they don't. It's usually another person that looks like them that wielded the power, you know? And for me, it was always different because I was at magazines, so I had both. I had tons of experiences with Black Americans in the media I was in were doing devilishment to me, plagiarizing, you know, not keeping their word, all those kind of things. But when I have my lessons, I don't chalk it up to them. They're Black, and that's why they did that. I'm like, who is the 85%?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? They're blind, deaf, and dumb, so they're not gonna be consistent. They're gonna be inconsistently good and inconsistently bad. I can't judge the original man based on this man, you know? And I think people do that, though. They do judge by the personal experiences that they had, you know? And we're in a time where the internet, led by organizations that are really out for money. When we look at organizations now, like ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves, Foundational Black Americans, however they define themselves, they haven't defined themselves by who they actually are and their connection to the whole world. But they've actually narrowed the gap and said, you are worthwhile for what makes you only you. And the problem is that the only thing that makes them them is that they were slaves. So you're making like the big calling card to yourself that you were a slave. You know, I even saw like it was Jared Bell, the scholar who shared a photo of a brother wearing an ADOS shirt and an ADOS fitted, and it said American Descendants of Slavery, like it was the fly shit. And I was like, we're identifying ourselves by what was horribly done to us. This is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
You know, when we identify ourselves as God, the whole thing about knowledge itself is that we're no longer identified by what we think we are or what anyone thinks we are. We only can define ourselves by what we show and prove scientifically. So we say we're God. Every next day, there's more research to say, who am I? Because everybody asks that every day. Things happen, you change, hells happen. We tackle who am I and who am I becoming every single day, whether you like it or not.
Yes, sir.
We tackle that by studying the science of ourselves, not by what people label us, not by the hells that we went through. You know what I'm saying? And it's like these organizations are fooling people because they have no plan for reparations. You know what I'm saying? And they don't make the distinction of where it's going to be some cash payments to like millions of people that'll devalue the dollar. It'll be worth nothing, you know? Or is it going to be real investment in the communities, you know, that have nothing to do with a set amount? You don't see any of that kind of discussion, because when you have that kind of discussion, then you can have discussion. Well, even if we don't get reparations, we made a list and real detail of what our communities need. You don't see anything that from reparations. What you really see is saying they stole this from us. It's us. They stole hip hop from us. It's really us. You know what I'm saying? They're trying to take our reparations. You know what I mean? Those Puerto Ricans are trying to take hip hop, the reparations from us. They're trying to take these things from us. And you know what's funny? Is that if there were reparations for Puerto Ricans here, the first thing that they would have to do is just give back the island that they took. It's not even about a money amount.
Right? Hold on a second. Hold on. That's a fact, yo. Right. That's a fact.
You know? So, right. You know, and this is the amazing thing. And it's like, I've seen like them riling up the people by the anger that the people have, you know. This was a thing that we used to have issues with, you know, like before. I'm forgetting his name right now, but he's one of the more famous people with Black Power channels, and white people do this, and Black people need to get this, and it's always a confrontational thing.
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about Tariq Nasheed,
right? As far as FBA, but you remember, like before the internet, we would be out in the streets and we would always see people that would be selling videos, lectures, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they would be always pitching it to the people. And their best pitch to the people was to rile up their anger. You know what I mean? Find out what white people are doing to you. Find out this, why we hate this, why we hate that. All of that is our history, but it has a detrimental effect. Like I remember one time I was passing one of the tables. I'm forgetting the brother's name.
I know his name. I just don't want to say his name.
Let's leave that out, right? He sees my flag, right? I had flags. I had a huge flag on. It wasn't even like my medallion now, right? And he goes, "Peace, God. Tell him why the white man is the devil." And I look around and I actually look back, and there were Black, brown, and white people there. And I look back and I didn't say, "Yeah, let's tell him." I looked back and I said, "Why don't you tell him how the Black man is God?" You know what I'm saying? Tell him that.
Yeah.
And it was little kids there, and it stuck with them, the positive thing. I don't know what that seed brought forth. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I kept going. It was a Thursday, God. So you know where I was going.
Yeah.
You know? But the thing about it is that, like, with people only on the internet, it's very easy to disconnect us. And a lot of these groups that are focused more on the hatred, they can focus that algorithm and close down a person's mind. You know what I'm saying? And because listen, people go like, but Puerto Ricans, they don't like Blacks, and Puerto Ricans are this, and they tell their people not to be like Black people, and this and that. And I'm like, you get no disagreement from me. My people are 85. They're blind, deaf, and dumb. They have segregated themselves so that they could get ahead. So when they tell you, look, don't hang around with those Black, like I do hip hop. So you know that my parents say, hey, be careful with those Black people when you go to these concerts and shows, you know. But then they're going to tell me something that's real from the limited things that they saw. I saw the news and there was a concert and they said there was a shootout in a concert.
Right.
Now, what good old earth wouldn't tell you about that? It's wrong. It's a misperception, but that's all they know. You know what I'm saying? That's all that they see. You know what I mean? So they tell you like, don't hang around with the blacks. Don't hang around with this. And it's funny because people think it's distinct to just like this group against theirs. A lot of people don't understand. And I'll say this particular to Puerto Rican history, us being conquered by the Spaniards and then the United States. The United States led a program of assimilation that was very aggressive. They aggressively taught the people in Puerto Rico to re-educate them, to get them off Spanish, to get them into English, and even to the extent that they would teach them the things that are American, like the food groups. So they would teach them about fruit that they've never seen before. I remember my old earth used to tell me about, they taught us about oranges, and it wasn't until I came to America that I ever had an orange. You know what I mean? So it was like they were teaching them stuff that was and it was very similar to like a lower level of what they did to the Native Americans, where they had the special schools that would take away their language, take away their history, and really try to deprogram them. You know what I mean? Where they would say, destroy the native mind, save the body. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they were doing that in a lower level in Puerto Rico as they industrialized it. You know what I mean? With Operation Bootstrap. So this had a great effect on many of the Puerto Ricans that left, like my parents in successive generations. You know what I mean? My mother was was from Puerto Rico directly, while my father was a second generation. You know, he grew up in Red Hook, so it was like second generation. And when we look at that now and we see this division, it's very easy to catalyze on that division because we have a long history of the effects of this separation. You know, like, for example, right, with like what Tariq Nasheed and others do, like saying that Puerto Ricans had nothing to do with hip hop. You know, it is funny that like my brother, the guy was telling me, Rio was telling me, you know, and I was saying that that's crazy because it's true. They're telling us that Puerto Ricans had nothing to do with hip hop, but they also will say that that much of the hip hop began across the street or nearby Roberto Clemente State Park. You know what I mean? So it's
I'm going to interject on that because what was said is that it's not that Puerto Ricans didn't have anything to do with hip hop. It's said that the argument is that hip hop is a Black American creation and Puerto Ricans maybe came later. So that's the argument.
Yeah, you know.
Can I interject as well?
Please,
briefly? Yeah. I get that aspect, but to me, aesthetically and from my perspective, I disagree because hip hop came from the street. It's a street element. It's the sciences. It includes everything. When I see footage, I see Puerto Rican kids out there breakdancing. Certain hip hop icons from the past that's not celebrated were, of Puerto Rican descent. And we gotta also remember that rap style, the Panthers were doing it on how they were delivering their messages, and we can't forget the Young Lords. So they add on to that. So people
let me interject on that. This is what I'm saying. Like this issue that arisen maybe in the past maybe few years, this is coming from somewhere else. This is why I don't understand what is the.
Let me give you a little history of that as regards the media and record labels. One of the reasons that I'll go back to what I think is the origins and what Puerto Ricans' role in it. But I'm going to tell you how we got so disconnected from even thinking about Puerto Ricans is that the media and the music industry, right? First, there was the music industry. Whatever Puerto Ricans that arose in the 80s and the 90s, right? And through the 2000s, we're talking about all the major record labels, they refused to sign Puerto Ricans in the general sense. So if they would, let's say if they were dark like you brothers, there was many Puerto Ricans dark like you both that were rhyming, like Prince Whipper Whip, you know what I mean? They had to not talk about being Puerto Rican and be marketed as an African-American MC. Other Puerto Rican MCs were constantly told that Puerto Ricans don't sell, and we can't market that. It's too confusing to the audience we go to. Black American art form, Black American artists. Now, this is not new to the hip hop. This is basically the same thing that happened to all the genres, though. This is like one of the biggest famous examples is Miles Davis, right? We can name a whole bunch of people. Miles Davis had real issues when he did, because all of his music really has jazz elements. It has improvisation, but he didn't want his records just stuck in the jazz section. He felt like On the Corner and all those albums in the 70s should have been in the pop sections, in the funk sections. You know what I mean? And look at Nina Simone. You know, the diversity of what she was doing. It had jazz elements, though. It had soul elements, right? So all of these artists couldn't get pigeonholed. It extends, though, when now the genre is kind of defined, right? Hip hop is kind of defined. You're rapping on it, and it's always going to be something like that, right? And it's going to be a repeated break. But then now, what's the imagery that we're gonna put out there? What's the image that we're gonna put out there? And this is stuff that I documented. Like Fat Joe told me directly to me, so because I did about 2 or 3 interviews with him over the years, you know what I mean? And he told me that when he was signed, they still pitched to him to sing instead, and they gave him TKA and other freestyle artists as the example, you know, and I just find it funny to think that Fat Joe would sing and dance like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just ridiculous. But they really didn't know how to market that kind of stuff. And, you know, thankfully, he was around already achieved artists, Lord Finesse and Diamond D and the Digging in the Crates guys, that they were able to push him out there, just like he was able to push out Pun. Because even in Pun's time, it was difficult. Even me writing, when I was at and I'll say it's true, when I was at the Source magazine, we did an issue commemorating Pun. It was a stained glass issue, right? The artwork was stained glass drawings of Pun. I think it was Pun, Eazy-E, Tupac, and Biggie, right? Those 4. They gave me Pun to do. And I assigned a writer, and I heavily wrote on it because he did a bang-up job on it. He wasn't so great at it. I didn't mind. But they kept taking out when I wrote that Puerto Ricans were also there in the creation of hip-hop. You know, these were other editors taking it out. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? Like, these are blocks where they were actually on. You know what I mean? Now, in my history, right, in writing about hip-hop, one of the first experiences I had was working in the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. And they had me there as a consultant about hip-hop and the origins. So I got to see a lot of researchers, including Raquel Rivera and Juan Flores, who returned to the essence, a great scholar, who were doing heavy research on the origins of hip-hop with regard to Puerto Ricans. There were many Puerto Ricans that were rapping at the same time that the other pioneer MCs were rapping, though, right? The reason that you don't know about them is like a lot of us, though, should and shouldn't know about. Most of them weren't as good as the brothers that made it. Remember, you had to earn the stage, though. They weren't good enough. That's the first thing. I keep it real. When it comes to the hip hop, the actual rhyming stuff, people don't see us rhyming. The main issue I have got is that they act like we eventually weren't really participating in it. I truly feel that we weren't the best at it, and that's why you don't see us all there in the beginning like that, right? There are reasons for that. You could say it's the command of the English language, right? The generations before don't have the command, but I also think it's because they were also engaged in other genres like salsa, which is really the first urban genre of New York City. And I remember building with Willie Colon a lot, right? Willie Colon with Hector Lavoe, the legendary GOAT.
Remember them?
Willie Colon used to tell me that all the clubs that hip hop ended up going into, that's where they performed first and dominated. That was him himself. That's not nobody. That's somebody that was actually there. Remember, Willie Colon's career hits a peak at the time that hip hop is just starting, right? So his their greatest records with Willie and Lavoe are from 69 to 73. And then they go solo. Willie keeps producing for Lavoe, but they still have incredible legendary records during that whole 70s reign.
And La Morga.
So they know, right? Yeah. So, yeah, Lavoe, yeah. And you know, by the way, I saw Willie perform La Mulga in around, I think it was like 2000, 1998. You know, of course, Lavo wasn't there. He had passed away, but I never got to see Lavo live. But the thing about it was, when it comes to that, you have to say, what's the difference? We're talking about a culture. So when I say culture, we all had a hand in it. Now, when we talk about other things, right? I think the fastest art forms to develop out of those four elements, though, is obviously graffiti, because it's already there. And if you count graffiti, right, people want to go back, and they go back to Philadelphia, and they want to talk about cornbread, but that has nothing to do with hip hop creation, because we're talking about graffiti, but graffiti is an embraced element. It's actually the stolen element that hip hop takes into itself. So at the time that they say hip hop is graffiti is an element of hip hop, like time Bambaataa goes, that's an element of hip hop. Puerto Ricans dominate graffiti just as much as anyone else. There are legends all over graffiti, and they influence with styles and techniques already. So telling me about cornbread is irrelevant to hip hop in that sense. You know what I mean? Now, the other thing is, like, the breaking is one of the greatest examples of cultural development. When you talk about breaking, you talk about dancing, a reaction to another element. So that means that the breaking is going to develop last, even if they have to be there first, right? The dancer's got to be there first, or there's nothing happening. But theirs is going to develop last to what we say breaking is, because they have to react to what the music is being made, how it's being made, and what it becomes.
Makes sense.
A lot of times they say, oh, those first parties, there was no Puerto Ricans. It was a small communal effort. You know what I'm saying? That's like saying, well, Kool Herc started it, though. How many Jamaicans were there when it first started, though? You know what I mean? It's something you could say, well, they weren't there, right? Is that what Kool Herc was pitching for? Because I know if I was a DJ, I want some Puerto Rican girls in there. You know what I mean? And some of the brothers, too, along with everybody else. In those first parties, they say breaking started, and they'll go, Herc's first parties. Breaking did not start the first parties. It's not even invented yet, though, because it's not a unique dance yet. You're seeing great dancers doing a combination of all what they already know and do. They didn't make up the stuff. In other words, the culture has to actually foment. It actually has to bubble and develop.
Right.
Most breakers that really know breaking, right? Not people that, oh, I did some dancing back in the day and I was battling people. I'm talking about the breakers that really innovated all the moves. All of them, have to admit. It's got up rocking, down rocking, freezes, and other elements. That when all those aspects come together, then it's breaking. Then it's what we have is breaking. You know what I mean? It's a lot different than, let's say, the emceeing, because the emceeing roots are everywhere. They're everywhere, right? We saw all music and rapping was already going on. So putting it on rhythmic is such a small step. Even though I say this, though, and having to make my own records, it's a hugely difficult step. But it's an easy, logical step, but it's a very difficult one. You know what I mean? To go from that leap from James Brown and all those others. And I'll add this about the diaspora. What's very interesting, and what shows from everybody that I ever interviewed from those times, is that rhyming appeals to all original people because it's inside of all of their cultures already. The toasting of dance hall, the salsa song is not like today where it's just a romantic song by Mark Anthony. Mm-hmm. Back then it was filled with jazz elements, though. That's what made it salsa. It had jazz improvisation, but it also had it from the sonero, the singer. The sonero would sing the regular lyrics, but then they would have a bridge and have call and response choruses. But in those call and response choruses, they're supposed to rhyme every other bar. So it's chorus, bar, chorus, and then rhyming the previous bar. And when they're doing it live, they're supposed to make up new ones. If you do the ones on the record, they're like, he's all right, but he's, it's not that good. And that's why on a lot of records, you hear a lot of disses, a lot of bars, like battle bars. You know what I mean? One of Lavo's famous songs was this Sonero Mayor, like I'm the best sonero. Like they was battling. You know, I remember in La Voz famous song, El Cantante, he has a line where he says, you know, I wear pants, I don't wear skirts. And I one time talked to Willie Colon, and I thought it was just a bar, and he told me who that was in reference to. You know what I mean? So this is like hip hop. So that kind of competitive culture was already in was already in the Caribbean, Latin and English Caribbean that was in that cipher.
Yeah.
So
That's a fact.
we talk about like what's making it so viable, what's making hip hop so appealing is because that competitive culture in singing is already there. It's actually not made up by hip hop. It's being infused and accepted because it's being infused because of everything that the MCs already know about, like James Brown, old soul records, Dolomite, and jazz too. But the other surrounding peoples are with it because they're used to that. They're used to that culture. You know what I mean? But when we talk about so when we break down the elements, the Puerto Ricans have different influences. I would say in all the elements, though, we are a participant in engaging and furthering the culture, right? From the beginning. What I also say is that as far as the co-creation of the cultures, many of them, we have varying hands, right? MCing a lot less, others do. What's interesting, and this is more research I have to do, is that there was a DJ Hollywood was one of the first, and he's from Harlem, was one of the first to make breaks. So he was doing breaks before Herc, but in a different way. So it's hard to say if Herc got that from him, right? We say Herc that's where hip hop really developed, where they all took shape, but Herc didn't invent the breaks. But I do feel that that he invented it for himself. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of times when you hear a song, you ever hear two songs and they got the same sample, and you know that they didn't bite off each other. It's just they found the sample at the same time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And Hollywood learned from a Puerto Rican DJ that was there, and I forget his name, but that's something that was also referenced in and I give the source though because I have sources. Is Dan Charnas's The Big Payback book. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is that we were already engaged in the New York City scene in innovating music on all levels. You know, so when they talk about this, especially Tariq Nasheed, he talks about Puerto Ricans like they had no hand in music. He's even gone so far to say that like when Puerto Ricans talk about their drumming, they're lying because we already were doing that. And that's disrespectful to what you're hearing. You know what I'm saying? Like anyone can hear that if you hear congas and bongos on the early jazz records, right? There were Black Americans playing those. But if you really want to be sincere about it, the only people that were playing them polyrhythmically and with a lot of other rhythms that originate from Cuba and Puerto Rico were us, you know? And look at the credits, a lot of these jazz albums, you know what I mean? From the beginnings with Chano Pozo and Mongo Santa Maria all the way to the 60s and 70s on a lot of the soul jazz records like Kenny Burrell records. My favorite Kenny Burrell album is Ray Barretto on congas, you know what I mean? So a lot of these influences are something that they're not connecting the diaspora, you know? And they're not seeing that there shouldn't be a claim that we invented any of these genres though. You know what I mean? The first of all, the Black American was dominating by numbers and by influence. You know what I'm saying? And there were different influences, but there is no Black American music that doesn't have influences from the diaspora. The core, I think, to me, because it's aside from hip hop, it's my favorite genre. There's nothing more influential to the roots of all Black music than jazz. But jazz roots are literally in a diaspora. They're not in just a Black American neighborhood. They're in New Orleans. You know what I mean? So, you know, so to say, so like this whole disconnect of the diaspora, I think is what's channeling to everything today. People don't really learn how to, they're not being taught to study holistically. They're being taught to learn with horse blinders. Like, what can we claim as our own history? I think
that is?
Say again.
That's pseudo nationalism.
Yeah, yeah. And you know what's funny, right?
You love that term, man.
Yeah.
It
You
is
know,
pseudo
you know,
nationalism.
a lot of people used to say that. A lot of militants and revolutionaries say that nationalism is a thing that kills. You know what I'm saying? And over time, it's been something that's seen. There's very few examples of nationalism that was productive for the diaspora. You know, we probably could only mention Fidel's Cuba as an example. You know what I mean? There isn't really much else that you can think of. You know, it's always been. And what's interesting about diaspora is that the deeper we look into history, the more that we see there was always a fight for a diaspora to see original people on a bigger level. You know, first thing I mentioned, like, you know, that's why the Puerto Rican, like example, the Puerto Rican and Cuban flags, that's why the colors are reversed. You know, it wasn't that one nation was like, I don't know what to make. Let's just do different, you know, let's just do a different flag with the same color. It was just bite. But it was actually Puerto Rican, Dominicans, and Cuban revolutionaries that were having a unity in the late 1800s, the times of the Spanish-American War. And they figured that if we gain our independence from Spain, we will have a solidarity amongst each other. Now, as we saw, they didn't, you know, those countries didn't win the Spanish-American War. It was the U.S. and they had taken U.S. and Cuba. Cuba, they left it to like Guantanamo Bay and other ways of keeping an eye on them, but they overtly took Puerto Rico because of its strategic point in as a lead in to the Atlantic Ocean, and so it has military significance. But that's why the flag colors were done that way, and the flag was done identical with reverse colors to show solidarity between the movements. This is what Jose Marti and the great revolutionaries of that time envisioned, you know? And it's something that I think not only Latinos are losing out on. You know, we were talking about the term Latin is an old language. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Latino is actually a term that was made up to be aggressively against Hispanic. You know what I'm saying? Because Hispanic was realized by old brown brothers everywhere that, like, listen, we're not from Spain. That's the oppressor. We don't relate to that at all. But then after a while, they started to take Latino, but then Latino was embraced, and it ended up having the same inefficiency in describing our indigenous African roots. You know what I'm saying? So it's ended up being as useless a term as Hispanic, even though Hispanic is the most disgusting. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm glad that most people don't call me Hispanic, though. You know what I'm saying? But even when I fill out like an application or things like that, I just put don't. I don't want to. I just don't. I don't want to engage in that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, but I think that, like all the roots of everything, it's a lot of ignorance. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of ignorance to what we do as a nation, what we've done in the community, you know? And I think too, and I want to address this because I saw something that I didn't like. I saw people that were in the nation on Facebook. Some people I know have been there for a long time, and they were black seeds. They were darker. And they put up a post by someone who's a yellow seed, Puerto Rican, who I disagree on almost everything that he says. And he had a post and he said, this is the understanding seed is the one to bring it to the knowledge seed. And it basically was something he was saying the Father said for us to do that. And it was such a gross misappropriation and misquote of what the Father actually meant and what was taught to us by the firstborn and the elders that was actually with the Father, because he wasn't with the Father or any of his elders, you know, any of his firstborn. So he wrote that incorrect statement. It's incorrect because none of the seeds are here to be over any other seed and bring it to them. You know what I mean? What the Father was really teaching, he was saying that each seed should have another seed with them. You know, the brown seed roll with a black and a yellow, the yellow roll with a black and a brown. He always wanted us to roll in the streets mixed, because the different he saw us all as original scientifically, but he knew in the society we would be treated differently. And so we needed the different lenses of each of our original people. So I roll with a black seed. He's going to see things differently than I do. Just like we're going to get treated differently by people, you know, just like a big imposing person sometimes scares people, and a guy my size may not scare people. I'm not scaring people viciously when I'm walking around. I'm a short guy, you know what I'm saying? So there's all differences. The same, he saw these things with the black, brown, yellow seed. But in that post where they showed that incorrect post, they were saying, how dare these yellow seeds think that they could give us anything and things like that. And I'm like, is that how we talk about each other? You know what I'm saying? Because if somebody had reversed that, I don't talk about that about the knowledge seed. You know what I mean? I said that's something that is kind of assuming that only knowledge seeds teach us. Just like that's assuming that only yellow seeds could teach the knowledge seed. But that doesn't mean that the knowledge seed isn't teaching us. It doesn't mean that understanding seeds aren't teaching knowledge seed. I've taught hundreds of students, God, right? I've been there every Thursday. It ends up adding up.
Yeah.
I've taught black, brown, yellow, white. You know what I'm saying? So it's a misnomer, but we're so quick to segregate, compartmentalize a whole people, label them, and say, those people keep messing up this whole thing. And we even do it with our own nation, I'm seeing. And that's something that's very disheartening. That's what disheartens me more. Seeing it on the YouTube and things like that. I've been seeing those horrible things written about me since Inf Mega started recording me, when Law School of Mecca page started. So it's been years and years of vitriol against me, you know, saying horrible things about me. And after a while, God, it's funny because they'll show their hand. They'll say stuff like, "You're not even at the school. You're not even in the nation," you know. And I'm like, you know, like, you just have to go for a while. You're gonna bump into me, you know. You just have to study the gods for a little bit. You're gonna bump into stuff. I have works out there. I'm at the school. Like, you're gonna bump into me, whether you like me or not, or disagree with me or not. So I know that it's the miseducation and the you know, the way that people empower themselves by separating like this.
Yes,
Again, the most disheartening thing is to see, like, and a lot of it comes from my peers. You know, this isn't something that any elder taught me. You know what I'm saying? This isn't anything that any elder had the mentality. I never felt like I never was spoken lesser to by any elder, God. Never. You know what I'm saying? You know, and people go, it's funny because I'll see stuff with, like, when he was alive, remember the perfection, Allah B? They were like, I'm gonna tell Allah B that you shouldn't be here because you're not a true God and everything, because you're light and you're not even black. And me and Allah B would laugh at it though. You know what I'm saying? Why we would talk about salsa, because he was a big fan of salsa, and he was dancing at the Palladium when Eddie Palmieri was out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's funny that they don't see, like, all of the things that we've seen, you know, and the intersectionalism. You know, people love intersectionalism if it gets them on another list of being a victim. You know, oh, I'm black, and I'm also this, I'm also that. So it's intersectionalism. You know, I deserve more things, and I'm a victim. But when the intersectionalism is just for the biggest, the most important thing, a unity of all of us, then it's like, I don't know about that. I don't know. You guys don't belong here. What are you guys doing here? You know what I mean? Then it's not a big problem. It's funny, you know. What I find the most funniest thing is that the majority, that, you know, some of the most famous documenters of hip hop, photographers like Joe Conzo, I forgot his name though, but some of the biggest recorder of old shows, Cold Crush Brothers, Grandmaster Flash, all of these shows that was recording the tapes that was circulating. One of the biggest creators of those tapes and recorders was a Puerto Rican. You know what I mean? And most likely one of those Cold Crush tapes, right, led by, of course, Charlie Chase, right, one of the first great Puerto Rican DJs. You had a tape that got to your hands because of a Puerto Rican, but we wasn't there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, They'll
Just like I
discount.
said, God, I think that argument is coming from somewhere else.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
like people from outside of New York,
yeah.
you
It
know,
it,
so they don't
it
really,
is. Yeah,
yeah. So
it
they don't
is.
really,
You
they
know.
weren't really there. They
Yeah.
don't have friends that were there. They don't have, you know, elders that were there. You know what I
It's
mean? This is
crazy.
like,
It's crazy because what people forget too is that during that time when hip hop was created, it seems like a lot of us weren't involved in it because not as many of us were involved in it as Black Americans. Now juxtapose that with the fact that the Puerto Rican population was larger than the Black American population. Now it looks like almost no Puerto Ricans are involved because there's so many that aren't, because there's more of them. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And a lot of the history of the Bronx before hip hop gets involved has to do with a lot of Puerto Rican activism with Black Americans together, right?
sure, yes, sir. And just
The
like
the,
brother
the Ghetto
Michael mentioned,
Brothers,
the
you had the
young
Ghetto
Lord.
Brothers, you have all of the activists that were Black that
Mhm.
were getting together, and that's what caused a lot of the gang violence to die down just enough where the arts could take place. It's because of the activism of Black and Brown together that even allowed an atmosphere for hip hop to take place. And it's a real shame that that gets devalued and dismissed or and not even looked. Because when these things are brought up to people that were FBA, they say, "Oh, that doesn't mean anything and everything." And you know, I'm seeing a tweet from somebody from Louisiana telling me about what New York was in the 70s. You know, I'm
That's what
like,
I'm saying, God.
you know, like this isn't the thing. You know what I mean? And it's But I'll say this though, in a general thing, the social media especially dictates what a lot of people think of scholarship. And again, it focuses on a lot of hatred. When I write a tweet that criticizes Jay-Z, it gets a ton of likes. I share some about somebody doing something great, it doesn't get traction, like it doesn't get shared that much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's always been like that, you know. And we have to look at, and I think this, and it's very critical. I talked about what Puerto Ricans, our issues within ourselves and our own ignorance, but go around everywhere. And the way Black Americans, and this has been in ciphers, not with the gods, but when I go around 85s, the way that they talk about light-skinned brothers is so terrible that I'm like, yo, is this even funny anymore? You're being serious? Like you really think it's funny when we see a meme, we see like a DeBarge looking dude and he's like soft, but like some of them go real, take it to heart. They'll be like, oh, that's why you can't do nothing with no light skin. Like you can't do nothing. And I'm like, and you see how these cliches work because in New York, I'll see that all around. But they'll see me who's as light as the brother you're talking to, the Black American you're talking to, but I'm Puerto Rican, so I'm tough with the knives, and I can't denounce it because I'm good with knives.
Stereotype.
You know what I'm saying?
Stereotype.
I'm
Yeah.
good with the butterfly knives, but I'm tough because I'm from Puerto Rican background and we're tough. But he's light-skinned Black American. He's soft. That's a soft, light-skinned dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, these are issues that get promoted more and more on social media, and it gets taught to the children. I remember it wasn't too long ago, I had some young children in my class, real young. So we just having fun. They were not at that age where they would really focus on the degrees much. So after we talked about math, we talked about basketball. And I was like, who do you like? And I was like, I love Kyrie. And I was like, I like my basketball taste is always favored to the shorter player, the guard play, right? So I'm like, yeah, I love Kyrie, you know, and Curry, he's my favorite. I said, Curry's my favorite. He said, I don't like Curry and everything. I don't like Curry. And I said, but you like guard play. How you don't like Curry? You know? And he's like, I like LeBron. And I'm like, you know, you could, I don't like LeBron, but you know, I'm a Jordan guy. But you could like LeBron and Curry at the same time. They're not really, you know what I mean? And I talked more to the kid. He's like 13, doesn't like Curry because he's light skinned, you know. He like thinking that he's all perfect and everything with his wife and his kids and everything. And I'm like, LeBron has kind of a perfect life too. He's never been in trouble. It's kind of the same, you know. How could you get upset about that? Now we know that the media they're gonna treat Curry in a different darling way because he's lighter. We know that, but that doesn't mean that you have to hate him though because of that. Because he's not. You've never seen him take on that privilege or act different, right?
Right.
from what we've seen and what he's talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that we have to work on, and they're almost like they're aggravated. They're like a sickness, but it gets aggravated with social media. It gets aggravated the way they pump out products. And see, the thing of now is that what's real detrimental is that when you have a hatred, you look to support that hatred. But not only have you supported that hatred, it has been logged in by the algorithm. And the algorithm will give you what you just supported. You know what I'm saying?
He's not lying.
Yeah.
On TikTok right now, it's
I go on
disgusting.
Instagram is visual. I go on my Instagram Explorer. I see basketball, I see kung fu, and I see beautiful women. These are things that I like.
Mm-hmm.
They know this. They throw beautiful women. They throw basketball stuff. They throw kung fu clips. You know what I mean? They know my algorithm. You know what I'm saying? But if you're saying all this stuff, what's going to be the algorithm? Is it going to be proper research that might refute that? Or is it going to be much worse?
Pure
you know?
hate. More hate.
Right? It's going to be more and more hate. And that's the whole thing. You know what I'm saying? Right? We know I'm low life. So you know that Facebook, though, got the Ralph Lauren bar on the ads every day.
Oh, wow.
Every day, the Ralph Lauren bar is under the ads. And every other day, I say, oh, what do they got here? What do they got? You know what I mean? So this algorithm is real. And a lot of people now with this technology, they get brought to the hate that they are manifesting, even more so. You know what I'm saying? And it's all just a reflection of what we've been teaching. The mind draws up what you're dealing with. What you love, what you hate, and what you fear is being brought to you. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
And so that's what gets brought to them. Can you imagine if people that their whole identity isn't about fighting for what the other person should give them? You know what I'm saying? That's going to produce a hatred too. You should be getting this for yourself. You know what I'm saying? You like we talk about the father and the great things he did in the community, right? He never went to the mayor. He built up the community, and then they came to him and said, "What could we do for you? Because you're kind of doing what we wanted, the peaceful, keeping everything peaceful. What do you want?" Then it was, "Now I want these bus trips. You know, I need some schooling for them to get to school, you know, like to get to college level and all of these things. I need a place for them to be," right? And he got us the school given to us by the mayor, John Lindsay. He didn't go to them asking. He didn't say, "We hate this, they need to do this." He had a totally different strategy of what they had in the 60s, right? The 60s strategies of militant groups was, we're going to defy things and we're going to make them do stuff, which I'm all for. I love all the revolutionary, Young Lord, Black Panthers, everything. But the fathers was in total contrast. He said, don't worry about them. You know, don't worry about that. You know, don't worry about what they do and worry about what you're doing. You know, focus on and new things that he made things revolutionary. He's like, focus, the babies are greatest. So be fruitful, multiply. You know, he told that to the older gods because they was fruitful. You know what I mean? Build, get students though, be on the block teaching. And they went to the blocks teaching. You know, some of the Puerto Rican history that's significant about the nation that people don't know is that one of the first Puerto Ricans to have knowledge was Allah Shasha. And I mention his history because he was the first Puerto Rican that I ever met that had knowledge. And because he knew I was Puerto Rican, and he's like, "You're Boricua, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Boricua." He was very, very hard on me in the early years of me with knowledge and teaching at the school. Very hard on me, you know? And I never, like all the other guys that were hard on me, that were elders, I never took it in an offensive way. I just like, he's not the one to play with. I always got to be sharp, you know? And I kept being sharp and yo, God, this wasn't even that many years ago. But one day he said, "You've been doing it." And from then on, he's real, the opposite with me, real peace. You know what I mean? And it's like, he told me that when he was young, he said, a lot of these other gods, they keep telling me I'm half original. They keep telling me that I'm not the god and I'm too light. I'm too this. And he said, listen, they don't understand and they need to learn, right? The best thing for you to do is to also go to your people and teach them. He knew that if they went to teach their people, he would bring more students and they would see the diaspora of the Boricua. You know what I'm saying? See, like, look, these are all different original people. So if you're taking just him on the visual, look at all these others. You know, look at the united culture, the united, you know, and when you get more people building, you get more perspectives. When you get more perspectives, you also get more understanding because they're all studying different angles of everything. You know, that's why the Father said, if you want to see Allah, you come together.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? That's one of the reasons, you know? And when I got knowledge and I was teaching at the school, right? One of the things that gods would do is that they would always bring Latino students to me all the time. They were like, I taught them though, but you could teach them even more so. You know what I mean? And so I never found offense in that. I never was offended by that because it wasn't like they were pulling out like, oh, he's a knowledge seed in your class. Let me take him out. They weren't doing that either. You know what I'm saying? So it was like an extra duty. You know what I'm saying? Because we know the language, we know the culture, we know the situations, you know? And one thing about our nation, and also reflects to all things, is that we have to study the history of the Black American, or else you don't know the history of the nation in God's nuts. That's New York history. You know what I'm saying? And that's Black American history. But a lot of gods that are Black American, as we develop and teach all the human families, they have to also do some more studies about different original peoples and their cultures. If we say that the original man is the black, brown, yellow, we're going to have to start learning a little bit about Japanese, Chinese, like why Taiwanese don't like to be called Chinese and how they, right? We have to learn their histories, right? We have to learn the histories of different Indian peoples and what that caste system really means from a person that really lives through that, right? We have to know why, you know, and if we don't, it'll be like what happens with Dominicans, right? We'll see a Dominican that's darker than any of us here, and they'll go, I'm not black. And we'll respond with anger instead of saying, wait, everybody's 85 in their own corrupt way.
Right.
How did this guy get to the point where he actually thinks that shit? We got to go into their history. You know what I'm saying? Because a Dominican, especially from the island, throughout the 20th century, are probably the most miseducated peoples that you will ever meet. They will tell you about how Haitians are cannibals, how they're the Africans and we're not the Africans, with the most articulate, most high level vocabulary that you will ever hear. And it's all wrong. It's all wrong. You know what I'm saying? And it's the generations now that are in New York that are slowly being like, nah, that shit you was saying was crazy. You know, that shit, whatever you was taught, that shit is not true. You know what I mean? And then they're seeing different angles of blackness, like what that means on a larger perspective, you know? Mm-hmm. That, you know, and so these contradictions from different original peoples are supposed to be foreign to us. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, how do you teach they're going to be darker peoples from different countries that don't have the experience we have, like Black and Puerto Ricans here in the city. You know what I'm saying? So you'll get like an Asian and he's like, I never went through no police brutality. You know, I'm good. You know, all of the stereotypes about me are positive. You know, they expect me to be smart. You know what I mean? They expect me to be of good behavior. You know what I'm saying? Shit, I told you I grew up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, but when I went to a store, I was the first person they were looking at. Right? Because tell you, look, watch the young Puerto Rican boys. They're the ones that steal shit. They're the ones that, you know what I mean? So it's like, what if they didn't go through that? Are we going to teach them just by vitriol and hatred of horrors? You know what I mean? Or are we going to show them like who we really are and how we are supreme, how we're almighty? You know? And I think that's what's getting lost in all of the movements that I'm seeing, if I could see the major flow in all the movements, they're more concerned about what their trauma is and what the effects are on them, you know. And that's also effect of today's sociology. You know, sociology is the social sciences making up new terms for what they're seeing, you know. And it's basically young millennial scholars. Like they a lot of young millennial scholars, I've been seeing it since the 2010s. They'll talk about even when they're positive, like Black Power and Black Revolt, we got to do this. And I'm like, you're really reinventing the wheel. You know that, right? Like they'll talk about, I wear my afro out, and I'm like, this is Black Power. And I'm like, wow, you know, like, you know, you're just doing it again, not necessarily inventing this. You know what I mean? I'll be around other Latinos, you know, and they'll talk about like, we have to set up a movement to revolt. And I'm like, hey, you need to know some of the young Lord history. You know what I mean? Like you're not reinventing this. Like, you know, we could learn from what was done before, you know, and that's what sets us up, God, for getting COINTELPRO'd again, you know, and being infiltrated so easily because we didn't really. A lot of people, like when I went to college, right, I learned that one of the things that made me powerful, God, is that I had a school knowledge, but I also had a community knowledge. I don't want to say street knowledge because people assume that it's just crime and shit like that. I'm talking about a community knowledge, a knowledge that is only developed in the community. That's what the 5% is. It's a community knowledge, you know. And if you don't have that, you're missing large aspects of history, you know, right? Like all these histories of the of hip hop, for example, they have no knowledge of how impactful the 5% was in all of the shit that they was doing. And if we go back though, a lot of the reasons these events went on peacefully is because of the gods. You know what I mean? Because they were not prone to the differences of the phenotype without doing the knowledge, you know, and knowing who people were and knowing who we are, you know. And this is what we have to bring back, you know what I'm saying? And that's how I see it, God, you know.
Indeed.